This story takes place 2 years ago. I live in London, and at the time we were in a Tier 4 lockdown. With the mutating strain of COVID-19 rampaging through the city, hospital beds nearly at capacity, and the death toll rising, it made sense to stay indoors as much as possible. But every human being has a breaking point, and mine was wandering around my one-bedroom apartment for 8 days straight. At 10 p.m. on New Year's Eve, I decided to go get some air. I was going to go for a quick walk around the perimeter of the local park, which would have taken about 40 minutes in total. The plan was to stop at a local grocery store and pick up a bottle of red wine on the way back. So, donning my face mask, I stepped down and started walking. One thing I wasn't prepared for was the eerily empty and almost silent streets of the city. As it was just below freezing, I decided to hustle and cut through some side streets first. In hindsight, this was a huge mistake. Navigating myself through the very quiet side streets, I neared the park when I saw a van turn in and rapidly approach me. Deciding to let them pass before crossing, I came to a halt. The van began to slow as it approached me. I could see the cab was occupied by 2 men between the ages of 25 and 40. Then it stopped. The driver's side window rolled down and a man leaned out of it.
Hey friend, we are lost. Can you point me to the nearest station?
No, I'm not one to perpetuate stereotypes, but this accent was not from the UK, and I'm not going to try and guess at its origin. Alarm bells began ringing out in my head immediately. What was a van doing out at this time? And why did they need directions to the local train station? In the middle of a Tier 4 lockdown. The van had stopped, so the side door was facing me. I stepped back a few paces and gave directions very quickly.
I did not understand all. I think it best if you show us.
With that, he opens his driver's side door and proceeds to open the side door of the van, revealing 2 other men standing inside. At this point, I said, "Fuck this," and just turned and ran down the side street that I came from.
Shit. Take the van around. I follow him.
Knowing that these guys were younger and more fit than I, a foot race back to my apartment was out of the question. The only advantage I had in the moment was my head start and a local knowledge of the streets. The side street I was on leads into a larger street that has homes with large hedges on the front yards. I ran past a few of the homes and entered the front garden of a house that had the most imposing and dense shrubbery. It was unlit, and I ducked down, but luckily for me, the house didn't have a motion sensor light. Within a few seconds, I could hear footsteps. They sped past me, and then they stopped. I peeked through the hedge and saw the man who was asking for directions earlier. He was a few houses down from me and on the opposite side of the street. He was looking around, and then I heard the sound of a vehicle coming down the street. I presumed it could only be the van from earlier. Lucky for me, it was a car. The man looked down at his phone, looked around, and pretended as if he was checking on something. And then he walked away. I waited for another 10 minutes to make sure the coast was clear, sitting behind the hedge in front of the garden and practicing an explanation for if the house lights came on and the owners came out. The house stayed unlit, thankfully, and after I figured that I spent long enough there, I walked back to my apartment building, keeping to the shadows and reacting to every sound. I was so on edge. I made it back, bolted the front door, and only when I sat down did I understand what I had just avoided. I poured myself a black coffee and debated calling the police, but what would I say? Had anything really happened that they could act on? Intuition of being kidnapped or being in danger is not enough evidence. Plus, being a man, this would not be a priority, especially on a night like that where they'd be overstretched. I decided to hunker down for the rest of my New Year's Eve, realizing that I had probably escaped something terrible. Additionally, I realized that if I'm going out for red wine, I should probably pick a more decent time. There's not much to this story yet, and it's still ongoing, but I'm scared for my life and I don't know what to do. It was New Year's Day, and it was me, my mom, my brother, and his best friend, RJ. We went to laser tag earlier that night, and we were driving home after it hit midnight. We turned onto RJ's street, and as we were driving, a random guy wearing a camo jacket ran into the street in front of us and ran back. My mom proceeded to remark about what a fucking idiot that guy must be. We continued driving until we parked outside of RJ's house and dropped him off. My brother went inside with him for a minute to see this new racing game that he bought, and me and my mom sat in the car for a few minutes till my brother came out of RJ's house. At that moment, a red minivan drove down the street with the passenger window down, and some guy yelled,
"You fucking bitch,"
at my mom. My brother quickly got in the car, and the red minivan stopped, and the guy in the camo got out of the passenger seat and started running for my car. My mom immediately backed up and drove away. We took a few turns to make sure we lost them, and we drove home. Once we got home, we were all freaking out, and we locked the doors. My mom went to bed, and so did my brother. I stayed up late because I'm the night owl of the family, and I looked out my window around 2 a.m. and saw the red minivan parked outside on our street. I tried to see who was in the car for a few minutes, till one of the guys in the car went on their phone. From the light coming off of the phone, I could tell it was the same man from earlier. It's been 2 weeks since then, and I still see the red minivan around my house. I haven't told my parents because they're already dealing with family problems right now. But it's creeping me out. Hopefully it goes away soon. When I was 13, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing the worst with the Y2K bug or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents split up, and from there they divorced. My mother and I moved across the country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone, and my mother was currently out of state. Now, this didn't worry me, as this wasn't the first time. I often came home to find a note on the kitchen counter saying that they'd gone to Florida for a few days, and that there were groceries in the fridge. Since the divorce, she was regularly leaving me for long periods of time to go to Florida. Anyway, this particular afternoon, I was watching a movie. I kept hearing these weird sounds outside, but I remember thinking it was probably the neighbors. Though they weren't extremely close, a couple of them were having a party over for the holiday. About halfway into the movie, however, the power in my house just suddenly went dead. I sat on the couch for a minute, just sort of in a panic daze, because it was near midnight and pitch black. I remember thinking the power must have gone out and that it would come back on, so I just decided to sit on the couch with my blanket and wait. A few minutes passed by when I heard a noise in the kitchen, where my back door is. My heart started racing in my chest because I thought it sounded like the back door being shut. The back door sits just off the dining room, which is connected to the kitchen, which leads directly into the living room, where I was currently sitting on the couch. A few seconds passed after I heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. In the dark, every noise suddenly felt magnified. When footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started as slowly and as quietly as I could to make my way towards the space between the love seat and the couch. I knew I could fit under the side table there, and be completely hidden by the dark and the ottoman from playing hide-and-go-seek with my friends many times when they were over. I was nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen, now towards the living room. They weren't hurried or anything. It was like they were just moving around the kitchen casually. I glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror, there was a dark silhouette standing in the archway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream. However, I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from my hiding spot and ran down the hallway. I believe the only reason I wasn't overcome was because the person chasing me had to go around the ottoman in the dark to follow me. I did what all children do when they're afraid, and I bypassed the front door, the guest room, the bathroom, and ran all the way to the farthest door down the hallway. My room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the front door unlocked and open in time, as it was right off the side of the couch. Now, as a bit of a side note, when I was 10, I got a bird for my birthday. He was a blue-fronted Amazon, and I named him Boo, because it was October and close to Halloween when I got him. Boo had a large iron cage that was like 6 feet tall, and it was kept in my room, despite the fact that Boo, like me, pretty much had the run of the house whenever he wanted. As I ran into the room, I slammed the door shut and locked it. However, the lock was simply one of those little turn knobs that you can easily pop with a butter knife. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked when the person on the other side started knocking on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or to scare me. But I knew in my heart that my little lock wasn't going to keep whoever it was on the other side of that door. It didn't keep my mother out when we were arguing, and I knew for sure it wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking, on the verge of tears, when the person started laughing. It was low, quiet, and because of that, it was even more frightening. It wasn't like manic laughter, but as if they were genuinely amused. It was the laughter that really frightened me, and I started heavily, hysterically crying and looking around my room to figure out what I could do. That was when I realized that Boo's cage would fit almost perfectly between the door and the wall of my closet. The cage moved quietly on my carpeted floor, but as I pushed it into place, it scraped against the door and alerted whoever was on the other side that I was trying to barricade myself in. I knew this because the second I did it, they suddenly started throwing themselves at the door. And I swear, I could hear the sound of the wood splintering and the door handle being twisted violently. Boo, who had been stirred awake by the movement, began literally screaming and flapping his wings. I might have screamed with him, but honestly, I don't remember screaming. I just remember being extremely scared. Terrified, I crawled under my bed and waited. Several minutes passed, and the person eventually stopped attacking my door. Boo continued screaming even after he stopped, though being under my bed gave me no feelings of being secure. I didn't come out from under it because I simply had nowhere else to go. I thought about trying to go out the window, but I was afraid he might expect it and therefore be waiting for me on the other side. And it was also several feet off the ground, as the house was built on a raised foundation. I remember laying under my bed, terrified for what felt like hours. I must have fallen asleep because I awoke to daylight the next morning. The fear of what happened came back to me as soon as I registered where I was and why. And the fear returned that whoever had been in my house might still be there. I did end up deciding to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor since it was daylight outside, and therefore felt less afraid. Crawling out a window is a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully, as I was not, and am still not, the most coordinated human being. Once I was back on my feet, however, I carefully made my way around the house, and that's when I noticed the back door was wide open. Scared but Feeling braver now that I was outside and that it was morning instead of pitch black night, I walked up the steps and peered inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, I decided to go inside. Looking back, I cringe on how stupid this was and could have turned out. And I wish I could have told my younger self to make the smarter move and just go get help somewhere. But thankfully, no one was inside the house. I did a terrifying, heart-pounding room check. Looking in closets, under beds, behind the couch, anywhere I thought even a small child like myself would have been able to fit. I even popped the locks on my mom's bedroom so I could check it, and then relocked it afterwards. When I was positive there was no one there, I went back to lock the back door. I had left it open in case I needed to escape, and noticed that the breaker box on the opposite wall was open. The main switch had been pulled. I flipped it back on, locked both locks on the back door, checked all the windows and the front door, and then I called my mom, where I once again broke down crying hysterically. She called a coworker who came and stayed the entire day with me as they drove back. My mom still takes random trips to Florida after that, but I always went with her from there on. So, terrifying, laughing, crazy man that broke into my house on New Year's Eve. Let's never meet again.